Flashing red and blue lights cut through the heavy midnight rain, reflecting off the polished hood of a Mercedes. Inside sat a man who had spent decades sending criminals to prison, completely unaware that tonight he was the one about to be thrown in handcuffs. A routine traffic stop was about to spiral into a viral nightmare of abuse, arrogance, and a shocking twist that would shatter a corrupt police department. Stay tuned, because arrogance is blinding. The courthouse was practically a tomb by the time Honorable Marcus Langford finally packed up his briefcase. At 58, he was a man who commanded the room before he even opened his mouth. A distinguished black man with silver threading through his close-cropped hair. His posture was a testament to decades of bearing the immense weight of the law. He was a superior court judge in the district, a man who had clawed his way up from a working-class neighborhood to the highest echelons of the state's judicial system. Tonight, his bones ached with the specific kind of exhaustion that came from presiding over a grueling 3-week homicide trial. He locked his old chambers, the heavy oak door clicking shut with a finality that echoed down the marble hallways. Under his arm, tucked neatly inside a black waterproof garment bag, was his judicial robe. It was his armor, a symbol of the heavy responsibility he wielded, and he was taking it home to be professionally dry cleaned for an upcoming swearing-in ceremony. Outside, the sky had opened up, dumping a relentless sheet of freezing rain onto the city streets. Marcus hurried to his reserved parking spot, slipping into the heated leather-bound sanctuary of his dark blue Mercedes-Benz S-Class. The engine purred to life, a quiet, expensive hum that barely registered over the sound of the rain drumming against the windshield. His commute home to Oak Ridge Estates, a secluded, affluent suburb known for its manicured lawns, sprawling mansions, and heavy private security presence, was usually his time to decompress. The roads were slick, shining like black glass under the amber glow of the streetlights. Marcus drove meticulously, his hands resting easily at 10 and 2, the classical music station playing softly from the vehicle's surround sound speakers. He was a short distance from his driveway when the darkness behind him was violently shattered. The strobe of red and blue lights exploded in his rearview mirror, blindingly bright. A police siren gave a short, aggressive wail, a demand, not a request. Marcus's brow furrowed. He glanced at his speedometer, 35 in a 35 zone. Both headlights were functioning. His tags were current, recently renewed. A flicker of unease danced in his chest, a primal instinct that not even a Harvard law degree and a seat on the bench could fully eradicate. He knew the statistics. He knew the reality of the streets, often better than the officers patrolling them. Remaining perfectly calm, Marcus activated his right turn signal, slowly pulling the Mercedes onto the shoulder of the road and stopping beneath the dim illumination of a flickering street lamp. He shifted the car into park, turned off the engine, and rolled down all 4 windows, a standard precaution to ensure officers felt safe approaching the vehicle. He placed his large, steady hands firmly on the top of the steering wheel, where they were clearly visible. Through the rain-streaked side mirror, he watched the cruiser's door open. 2 figures stepped out into the deluge. The lead officer, walking with a puffed-out chest and a swagger that bordered on theatrical, was Officer Preston Hale. Hale was in his late 20s, a man whose aggressive posture suggested a deep-seated need to prove his authority. His hand hovered over the butt of his service weapon as he approached the driver's side. Trailing slightly behind him on the passenger side was his younger partner, Officer Damian Reed, a rookie who looked like he barely needed to shave, his face tight with nervous energy. Hale flashed his heavy maglite directly into Marcus's face, the beam searing his retinas. "Good evening, officer," Marcus said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone, projecting the same authoritative calm he used to silence bickering attorneys in his courtroom. "Is there a problem?" "Keep your hands on the wheel," Hale barked, completely ignoring the greeting. The flashlight beam aggressively swept the luxurious interior of the Mercedes, lingering on the wood-grain dashboard, the premium leather, and finally settling back on Marcus's face. "Whose car is this?" Marcus blinked against the harsh light. The underlying accusation in the question was immediate and crystal clear. "This is my vehicle, officer," Marcus replied evenly. "May I ask why I was pulled over?" Hale scoffed, a wet, ugly sound that cut through the rain. "Your vehicle? Right. You expect me to believe a guy like you is cruising around Oak Ridge Estates in a $150,000 Benz in the dead of night?" Marcus felt a cold, familiar knot tighten in his stomach. It was the same prejudiced venom he had fought against his entire career, manifesting right here on a dark road. He knew instantly that his judicial title would not save him. In fact, revealing it now to a man looking for a fight might only escalate the situation. Hale wasn't looking for a judge. He was looking for a victim. "I live in this neighborhood," Marcus stated clearly. "I am returning home from work. Again, officer, I am legally required to ask, what is your reasonable suspicion for initiating this traffic stop?" The legal terminology seemed to act like a spark on a powder keg. Hale leaned closer, his face inches from the window, rain dripping from the brim of his cap. He smelled faintly of stale coffee and overpowering spearmint gum. "Oh, we got a roadside lawyer here," Hale sneered, glancing over the roof of the car at his partner. "Hey, Damien, you hear this guy? Asking about reasonable suspicion." Hale turned his attention back to Marcus, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "I'll tell you what my suspicion is. My suspicion is that this car doesn't belong to you. My suspicion is that you're going to hand me your license, registration, and proof of insurance, or I'm going to drag you out through this window. Understand?" Marcus did not flinch. He slowly lifted his right hand, keeping his movements deliberate and telegraphed. "My wallet is in my breast pocket, officer. My registration is in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for my wallet now." "Do it slow," Hale snapped, his hand gripping the handle of his gun tightly. Marcus retrieved his wallet, extracting his driver's license, and then reached across to pop the glove compartment, handing over the registration. He kept his hands entirely visible the whole time. Hale snatched the documents. He shined his light on the license. Marcus Langford. He looked at the registration. Marcus Langford. The paperwork was flawless. But instead of returning the documents and sending him on his way, Hale's jaw set in a stubborn, angry line. The facts did not align with the narrative he had already written in his head. "Fake ID," Hale muttered confidently, tapping the plastic card against his knuckles. "Good quality, but I've seen better. Where did you steal the car, Langford? Or whatever your real name is?" "Officer, that is a state-issued driver's license. The vehicle is registered to me," Marcus said, his tone dropping an octave, slipping into the cold, commanding register that usually made seasoned defense attorneys break into a sweat. "I have complied with your requests. If you are not writing me a citation for a traffic violation, I am asking if I am free to go." "You're not going anywhere," Hale spat. "Step out of the vehicle." "I am politely declining your request to step out of the vehicle, officer, as you have not articulated a lawful reason for detaining me," Marcus replied, his hands remaining locked on the steering wheel. He knew the law perfectly. Pennsylvania versus Mims gave officers the right to order a driver out of a car, but Marcus was testing the waters, documenting every constitutional violation in his mental ledger. He wanted Hale to commit fully to his baseless aggression. "It wasn't a request, pal," Hale shouted, suddenly yanking the driver's side door open. The freezing rain immediately blew into the pristine interior of the Mercedes. "Step out of the car right now, or I will charge you with resisting arrest." From the passenger side, Officer Reed shifted uncomfortably, his flashlight wavering. "Mitch, Preston," Reed called out hesitantly over the rain. "The registration matches the ID. Maybe we should just run it through dispatch before we—" "Shut up, Damien," Hale barked. "I know a booster when I see one. He's stalling." Hale turned back to Marcus, his hand now hovering over his taser. "Last warning, Langford. Out of the car." Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt with slow, precise movements. He knew that arguing constitutional law on the side of a dark highway with an armed, irrational man was a fool's errand. The courtroom was his battlefield, not the asphalt. He stepped out into the freezing rain, standing to his full height. At 6'2", he towered over Officer Hale, a physical reality that only seemed to infuriate the young cop further. "Turn around and put your hands on the roof of the car," Hale ordered, shoving Marcus roughly by the shoulder. Marcus remained stoic, absorbing the physical insult without a word, placing his hands flat against the cold, wet roof of his own vehicle. He spread his legs as Hale kicked his ankles apart, aggressively patting down the pockets of Marcus's tailored suit jacket and trousers. "Nothing on him," Hale grunted. He leaned into the open doorway of the Mercedes, his flashlight sweeping the interior again. The beam moved from the empty passenger seat to the back seat, finally illuminating the black garment bag hanging from the dry cleaning hook. The zipper had slipped down a few inches, revealing the heavy pleated black fabric inside. Hale grabbed the bag and unceremoniously yanked it off the hook, tossing it onto the wet leather of the back seat. He ripped the zipper all the way down, exposing the black judicial robe. A cruel, mocking laugh erupted from Hale's chest. Well, look what we have here, Damien." Hale pulled the heavy black robe out of the protective bag, holding it up in the rain. The fabric, meant to represent impartial justice, dripped with dirty highway water. "What is this?" Hale sneered, walking over to where Marcus stood with his hands on the roof. He shoved the wet fabric into Marcus's line of sight. "Is this a choir gown? You singing in the gospel choir on Sundays, stealing cars on Fridays." "That is a judicial robe," Marcus said, his voice eerily calm despite the inferno of rage building in his chest at seeing his symbol of office disrespected. "Please return it to the protective bag." Hale burst into raucous laughter, looking over at his partner. Reed didn't laugh. He just looked deeply uncomfortable, rain plastered to his pale face. "A judicial robe," Hale mocked, stepping closer to Marcus, his breath hot against the judge's neck. "Who are you dressing up as, Grandpa? Judge Judy? Is it Halloween already, or are you playing a lawyer in some community theater play?" "I am not playing anything, officer," Marcus replied, keeping his eyes fixed on the wet asphalt. "I strongly advise you to run my name through your dispatch system. Look at the occupation listed in the state registry. I don't need dispatch to tell me what I'm looking at," Hale spat, tossing the wet robe onto the muddy shoulder of the road. Marcus's jaw tightened so hard his teeth ached as the fabric hit the dirt. "I'm looking at a liar, a thief, and a guy who thinks he's smarter than the police. Let me guess. You broke into some rich guy's house in Oak Ridge, stole the keys to the Benz, and grabbed this costume to use as a disguise. Or maybe you were going to pawn it. You're making a grave mistake, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet whisper. A mistake that will cost you your badge. That was the trigger. Hale's face contorted with pure, unadulterated rage. The idea of this man, a black man, he had already categorized as a criminal, threatening his authority, was intolerable. "Are you threatening me?" Hale screamed, grabbing Marcus by the collar of his expensive suit and violently slamming him against the side of the Mercedes. The impact knocked the wind out of Marcus, his chest hitting the door frame hard. "Preston, hey, take it easy," Reed yelled, finally taking a step forward, his hands raised. "He's not fighting back. Just cuff him if we're taking him. He just threatened an officer of the law," Hale roared, pressing his forearm against the back of Marcus's neck, pinning his face to the wet glass of the window. "Give me your hands. Stop resisting." "I am not resisting," Marcus gasped out, his cheek flattened against the glass. He brought his hands behind his back entirely of his own volition, refusing to give Hale the satisfaction of a struggle. He knew that any sudden movement, any attempt to defend himself, would be written up in a falsified police report as assaulting an officer. Click, click. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit brutally into Marcus's wrists. Hale ratcheted them as tight as they could possibly go, cutting off the circulation to Marcus's hands instantly. The indignity of the moment was suffocating. Honorable Marcus Langford, a man who had sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution, a man who regularly had the chief of police sitting in his chambers asking for warrants, was now shackled like a violent felon in the pouring rain, pinned against his own property. "You're under arrest for grand theft auto, possession of stolen property, and resisting arrest," Hale hissed in Marcus's ear, his tone triumphant. "You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it, because I am too sick of hearing your voice." As Hale dragged Marcus backward toward the police cruiser, a pair of headlights approached from the opposite direction, slowing down. It was a silver Lexus SUV. Marcus recognized the vehicle instantly. It belonged to Dr. Leonard Shaw, a retired orthopedic surgeon who lived 3 houses down from Marcus in Oak Ridge Estates. The SUV rolled to a near stop. Leonard Shaw peered through the rain-streaked window, his eyes locking onto Marcus. Marcus looked back at his neighbor, rain dripping from his eyelashes, his hands bound tightly behind his back. He expected Leonard to roll down the window, to yell out to the officers, "Hey, what are you doing? That's Judge Langford." Instead, Leonard Shaw's eyes widened in shock, and then slowly a look of nervous apprehension washed over his face. He quickly looked away, hitting the gas and speeding past the scene, his taillights disappearing into the stormy night. The betrayal stung, but it only crystallized Marcus's resolve. The world saw what it wanted to see. Hale saw a criminal. Shaw saw a liability. Neither saw the man. Neither saw the man. Hale barked, shoving Marcus roughly toward the back of the squad car. Reed opened the rear door, looking down at his boots, unable to meet Marcus's eyes. Hale grabbed the top of Marcus's head and practically threw him into the cramped, hard plastic back seat of the cruiser. The door slammed shut with a heavy metallic thud, sealing Marcus in the claustrophobic darkness that smelled of vomit and industrial cleaner. Outside, Marcus could hear the muffled voices of the two officers through the rain. "Preston, are you sure about this?" Reed was saying, his voice laced with panic. "The car isn't reported stolen. The plates come back to him. We have no actual probable cause, and the guy isn't acting like a booster. What if that ID is real? Grow a spine, Damien." Hale snapped back. "I've been on the force longer than you. I know how these guys operate. They get their hands on a nice suit and a fancy car, and they think they're untouchable. He probably printed that ID in his basement. And what about that weird black costume? Who carries that around? It's probably stolen property, too. We'll get him to the precinct, put him in the box, and he'll confess. They always do." "What about his car?" Reed asked. "Call for a tow. Have it impounded, and toss that stupid dress in the trunk for evidence." Marcus sat in the pitch-black back seat, his wrists throbbing, his wetsuit clinging to his skin, shivering violently from the cold. He leaned his head back against the thick plexiglass partition. A normal man would be screaming. A normal man would be crying, begging them to check his credentials, shouting his title until his throat bled. But Marcus was a master chess player, and Officer Hale had just aggressively moved his pawns without looking at the board. Marcus knew the dash cam was rolling. He knew the microphones on the officers' uniforms were recording every word, every threat, every racial assumption masked as police intuition. He also knew the moment he revealed his identity as a superior court judge, the blue wall of silence would descend. Hale would immediately apologize, claim it was a terrible misunderstanding, uncuff him, and beg for forgiveness. The department brass would sweep it under the rug, offering Marcus a private apology, while leaving Hale on the streets to terrorize someone who didn't have the power to destroy him. Marcus wasn't going to let that happen. He wasn't going to let Hale realize his mistake in the dark, where it could be hidden. He was going to let him carry this charade all the way into the blinding fluorescent lights of the precinct. He was going to let Hale write his falsified report. He was going to let him stand before the booking sergeant and double down on his lies. Only when the trap was completely sprung, only when there was absolutely no way for the department to hide the rot in their ranks, would Honorable Marcus Langford finally introduce himself. The front doors of the cruiser opened, and both officers slid into the front seats, bringing the smell of wet wool and adrenaline with them. Hale adjusted the rearview mirror, locking eyes with Marcus in the reflection. "Comfortable back there, fake ID," Hale sneered, throwing the cruiser into drive. Marcus Langford looked directly into the mirror. His face was a mask of terrifying, unbreakable calm. "I am exactly where I need to be, Officer Hale," Marcus replied softly. "Drive." The 12th precinct of the Oak Ridge Police Department was a stark contrast to the affluent neighborhood it bordered. Inside, it was a sensory assault of harsh fluorescent lighting, peeling linoleum floors, and the deeply ingrained odors of industrial bleach, stale sweat, and burnt coffee. It was a place designed to break spirits, to make the people sitting on the hard wooden benches feel small and powerless. Officer Preston Hale practically kicked the heavy double doors open, marching Marcus Langford into the chaotic bullpen by the chain of his handcuffs. Marcus's tailored suit was thoroughly soaked, sticking to his frame, and his wrists were bruised a deep, angry purple. Yet he walked with a perfectly straight spine, his chin held high. He did not look like a man who had just been arrested. He looked like a man inspecting a severely mismanaged facility. "Keep walking, Booster," Hale muttered, shoving Marcus toward the booking desk. Behind the elevated desk sat Desk Sergeant Elias Thorne. Thorne was a 20-year veteran of the force, a large, balding man with heavy bags under his eyes, who looked like he had seen every variation of human stupidity at least twice. He barely looked up from his computer screen as Hale approached, dragging Marcus like a hunting trophy. "What do we have tonight, Preston?" Thorne asked, his voice a rumbling monotone, tapping away at his keyboard. "Looks like you dragged this one through the local car wash. Got a live one, Sarge," Hale boasted, leaning against the tall desk, chest puffed out. "Grand theft auto, possession of stolen property, resisting arrest, and carrying a highly sophisticated fake ID. Pulled him out of a stolen $150,000 Mercedes S-Class over on Elm and Maple." Thorne finally looked up, his weary eyes scanning Marcus from head to toe. He took in the wet, expensive suit, the silver hair, and the unflinching cold stare. Thorne had processed thousands of car thieves in his career. The man standing in front of him didn't fit the profile, not even lightly. "Fake ID, huh?" Thorne said skeptically, extending a meaty hand. "Let's see it." Hale slapped Marcus's wallet onto the desk. "Yeah, it scans, but look at him. Guy claims he lives in Oak Ridge Estates. Probably printed the card in a boiler room downtown." Officer Damian Reed walked through the double doors a moment later, carrying the dripping black garment bag and the soaked judicial robe wadded up under his arm. He looked miserable, his eyes darting nervously around the room. "Put the evidence on the counter, Damien," Hale commanded. He pointed a mocking finger at the wet black fabric. "Get a load of this, Sarge. Guy was carrying around a choir gown or a Halloween costume. Probably stole it out of the trunk of the Benz." Marcus stood perfectly still in front of the desk. He looked directly up at the security camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling, ensuring his face was clearly visible before speaking in a booming, perfectly articulated voice that silenced the surrounding officers in the bullpen. "For the record," Marcus stated, his voice echoing off the concrete walls, "the time is late, and I am formally requesting that these handcuffs be loosened. They have been ratcheted to their maximum tightness without justification, cutting off my circulation, and I am beginning to experience numbness and severe nerve pain in both hands." Thorne frowned, looking over the desk at Marcus's wrists. The metal was indeed biting viciously into the flesh, the skin around the cuffs swollen and discolored. "Loosen his cuffs, Preston," Thorne ordered softly. "There's no reason to have him strung up like a hog if he's cooperating." "He's not cooperating, Sarge. He threatened me on the side of the road," Hale protested, his face flushing red. "He said I was making a mistake and that I was going to lose my badge. That's a direct threat to a police officer. I'm leaving them on until he's in the cage." Marcus did not argue. He simply looked back up at the camera, giving a single slow nod to the lens. The documentation was complete. Hale had just admitted on the precinct's internal audio-visual recording system to using the handcuffs as a punitive measure for a perceived insult, a direct violation of department policy, and a clear-cut case of excessive force. Thorne sighed, rubbing his tibbles. He didn't have the energy to fight with a hothead like Hale at that late hour. "Fine, let's just get him in the system. Empty your pockets, John Doe." "My name is Marcus Langford," Marcus replied calmly, "as the identification card currently resting on your desk clearly states." "Yeah, we'll see about that," Thorne muttered. He opened the wallet, pulled out the damp driver's license, and began typing the information into his terminal. Hale, meanwhile, strutted over to a nearby workstation and logged in to begin his arrest report. He typed furiously, eager to document his heroic takedown of a master car thief. He was already composing the narrative in his head. Suspect exhibited aggressive, furtive movements. Suspect aggressively resisted verbal commands. Suspect issued violent threats against my person. "Hey, Damien," Hale called out across the room, not taking his eyes off his screen. "Make sure you log that black dress into the property room as miscellaneous stolen garments. I want it documented." Reed nodded weakly, pulling a plastic evidence bag from a dispenser. As he unfolded the wet black fabric to shove it into the bag, he paused. He held the robe up by the shoulders. It was heavy, pleated, with wide bell sleeves. It didn't look like a choir robe. It looked incredibly formal. Reed swallowed hard, a terrible sinking feeling settling into the pit of his stomach. "All right, Langford, or whoever you are," Thorne grunted, stepping out from behind the desk and motioning toward the live scan fingerprint machine. "Step over here. Put your right thumb on the glass." Marcus stepped forward. Despite the agonizing pain in his wrists, he managed to control his hands, to press his right thumb onto the illuminated green glass of the scanner. He did not say a word. He followed every instruction with mechanical precision. Right thumb, right index, left thumb, left index. 4 fingers flat. Thorne watched the screen as the digital prints populated. The Automated Fingerprint Identification System, AFIS, linked directly to the FBI's National Crime Information Center, NCIC, and the state's secure judicial and law enforcement databases. It was designed to catch aliases, outstanding warrants, and reveal the true identity of anyone processed. "Systems running," Thorne announced lazily, taking a sip from a styrofoam cup of cold coffee. "Should take about 30 seconds. Then we'll see what kind of sheet you actually have, buddy." Hale chuckled from his workstation. "Bet you a 20 it comes back to a rap sheet a mile long, Sarge. Grand theft, burglary, the works." Marcus simply stared at Thorne. Thorne glanced at the screen. The loading bar reached 100%. The system chimed softly. Thorne blinked. He leaned closer to the monitor, his brow furrowing deeply. He rubbed his eyes and looked again. The text on the screen was glowing in a bright, undeniable green font. AFIS/NCIC database match. Result. Category data record. Name Langford. Marcus T. D.O.B. August 14th, 1967. Criminal history. 0 results. Clean record. Employment status. State government official. Clearance level. Judicial Tier 1. High security. Title. Superior Court Judge, 5th District. Alert. Verified official. Do not detain without warrant. Thorne's mouth opened, but no sound came out. All the blood instantly drained from his face, leaving him a sickly, chalky white. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He slowly looked up from the monitor. He looked at the tall, silver-haired black man standing in front of him, soaking wet, shivering, with his hands clamped in brutally tight metal cuffs behind his back. He then looked past Marcus toward the counter, where Officer Reed was attempting to stuff the wet black garment into an evidence bag. Thorne's eyes locked onto the garment, the heavy pleats, the bell sleeves, a choir gown, a Halloween costume. Thorne felt physically ill. It wasn't a costume. It was a judicial robe, a superior court judge's robe. "Sarge," Reed stammered, noticing the sheer horror radiating from Thorne's face. "What is it? Did he pop for a warrant?" "Oh my God," Thorne whispered, the sound barely escaping his lips. His hands started to shake violently. He had been on the force for 2 decades. He knew the names of the judges. He knew the name Langford. He had just never seen the man in person, let alone drenched in rain, without his suit jacket and tie on. "Preston," Thorne said, his voice cracking. Hale stopped typing. Hale, oblivious to the nuclear bomb that had just detonated in the room, kept hammering away at his keyboard. "Just finishing the narrative, Sarge. I'm hitting him with the resisting charge, too. Guy's a menace. Preston, get your hands off that damn keyboard right now," Thorne roared, the sudden explosion of volume making every officer in the bullpen jump out of their skin. Hale froze, his hands hovering over the keys, blinking in confusion. "What? Sarge, what's the problem?" Thorne didn't answer him. He practically dove over the booking desk, fumbling frantically for his heavy ring of keys. He rushed toward Marcus, his hands shaking so badly he dropped the keys twice onto the linoleum floor. "Your Honor," Thorne choked out, his voice trembling with sheer panic as he scooped up the keys and grabbed Marcus's arm. "Your Honor, sir, I am so sorry. I am so deeply, deeply sorry." Hale stood up from his desk, a mocking smile still plastered on his face. "Your Honor, Sarge, what kind of joke is this? Did the fake ID say he was the mayor or something?" "Shut your mouth, Hale. Not another word," Thorne screamed over his shoulder as he desperately jammed the small key into the cuffs binding Marcus's wrists. Click, click. The heavy metal cuffs fell away. Marcus brought his arms forward slowly, wincing in visible pain as the blood rushed back into his severely bruised and indented wrists. He rubbed them gently, his face remaining entirely impassive. He did not smile. He did not gloat. He simply stood there, a towering pillar of silent, terrifying authority. "What is going on here?" The booming voice came from the staircase leading to the upper offices. Captain Donovan Vale, the night shift commander, stood on the landing holding a mug of tea. Vale was a sharp, meticulous man who ran a tight ship. He descended the stairs, his eyes darting between Thorne's panicked face, Hale's confusion, and the wet, bruised man standing in the center of the room. As Vale got closer, his eyes widened. He stopped dead in his tracks, dropping his ceramic mug. It shattered on the floor, hot tea splashing everywhere, but Vale didn't even flinch. Captain Vale knew exactly who Marcus Langford was. Recently, Vale had sat in the witness box in Langford's courtroom, testifying in a high-profile homicide case. He knew the judge's face, his voice, and his fearsome reputation for zero tolerance when it came to police misconduct. Judge Langford. Captain Vale breathed, his voice hollow with disbelief. He looked at the bruised wrists. He looked at the puddles of water forming around Marcus's expensive shoes. He looked at the judicial robe stuffed halfway into a plastic evidence bag. The entire precinct went dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the fluorescent lights and the rain lashing against the barred windows. Officer Preston Hale's arrogant smirk vanished, replaced by a look of profound, paralyzing confusion, which slowly, agonizingly morphed into absolute terror. Captain Vale, Marcus finally spoke. His voice was no longer the polite, restrained tone he had used on the side of the highway. It was the voice of the court. It was a voice that commanded absolute silence and obedience. It is a profoundly disappointing evening. Vale rushed forward, his face pale. Judge Langford, sir, I don't understand. What happened? Why were you brought in? Marcus slowly turned his head, his piercing gaze locking dead onto Officer Hale. Hale took a step back, physically shrinking under the weight of the judge's stare. I was pulled over on my way home from the courthouse, Marcus stated, enunciating every single syllable with lethal precision. Officer Hale informed me that my vehicle was stolen, my state-issued identification was forged, and that my judicial robe— Marcus paused, pointing a steady, bruised finger at the wet fabric on the counter— was a stolen choir gown he referred to as a costume. Vale whipped his head around to glare at Hale, his eyes practically burning holes through the young officer. Hale, tell me you didn't. Captain, Hale stammered, his tough guy facade completely shattering. He was driving a Benz in Oak Ridge. He didn't look like, he didn't say he was a judge. I was never given the opportunity to present my credentials beyond the legal requirement of my license and registration, which you immediately declared fraudulent, Marcus countered, his logic a steel trap snapping shut. You physically assaulted me, pinned me against my own vehicle, placed me in restraints intended to cause physical pain, and mocked my profession, all while your body camera and dash camera were presumably recording every single violation of my civil rights. Marcus turned his attention back to the captain. Captain Vale, I want a photographer down here immediately to document the lacerations and bruising on my wrists. I want the audio and video footage from Officer Hale's cruiser and body camera secured and placed into evidence, with a copy sent directly to the Internal Affairs Division and the District Attorney's Office. Marcus took a step closer to Hale, who was now visibly shaking. You told me I was making a mistake, Officer Hale, Marcus said softly, the silence in the room amplifying his words. You told me you were sick of hearing my voice. Well, I assure you, for the next several months of litigation, investigations, and your inevitable termination hearings, my voice is going to be the only thing you hear. The silence in the 12th precinct was absolute. Heavy and suffocating. It was the kind of quiet that precedes a catastrophic structural collapse. Captain Donovan Vale stood frozen for a fraction of a second before his training and self-preservation instincts violently kicked in. He knew with absolute certainty that his precinct was currently ground zero for a multi-million-dollar federal civil rights lawsuit, a Department of Justice probe, and a media firestorm that would scorch the earth. Thorn, Vale barked, his voice cracking like a whip, shattering the quiet. Get the precinct photographer up here right now. I want macro lenses. I want color-accurate lighting. I want every single contusion, abrasion, and mark on Judge Langford's wrists, documented from 5 different angles. Thorn scrambled for his radio, his hand still trembling. Yes, Captain. Right away. And Thorn, Vale continued, his eyes never leaving Hale. Lock down the server. Isolate the dashcam footage from Cruiser 47 and the body-worn camera data for both Officer Hale and Officer Reed. Encrypt it and give me the only administrative password. If a single frame of that video gets corrupted, accidentally deleted, or lost in the cloud, I will personally see to it that you are indicted for tampering with evidence. Hale's face was completely devoid of color. The arrogant, swaggering street cop who had brutalized a man in the rain just 20 minutes prior had been replaced by a terrified child staring into the abyss of his own making. "Captain," Hale pleaded, taking a shaky step forward, his hands raised in a gesture of supplication. "Captain, please, let's just talk about this in your office. It was a dark road. It was raining heavily. The suspect, the judge, he was driving a vehicle that fit a profile in a high-crime adjacent area. It was a good-faith mistake under stressful conditions. Qualified immunity covers. Do not insult my intelligence by citing qualified immunity, officer," Marcus Langford interrupted, his voice dropping an octave, echoing with a chilling, resonant authority. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. Qualified immunity protects government officials from civil liability only insofar as their conduct does not violate clearly established statutory or constitutional rights of which a reasonable person would have known. A reasonable person knows that a valid state-issued identification card is not a forgery simply because you harbor deep-seated racialized assumptions about the wealth of the person handing it to you. Marcus took a slow, deliberate step toward Hale, ignoring the sharp pain radiating up his forearms. Furthermore, Marcus continued, his gaze pinning Hale to the floor. A reasonable officer does not use handcuffs as an instrument of torture because his ego was bruised by a citizen lawfully questioning a detention. You did not make a good faith mistake. You engaged in a textbook deprivation of rights under color of law in direct violation of Title 18. United States Code, Section 242. You weaponized your badge. Captain Vale stepped between the two men, not to protect Marcus, but to isolate the radioactive liability that Hale had become. Officer Hale, Vale ordered, his tone stripped of any camaraderie. Hand over your service weapon. Now. Hale visibly flinched. Captain, you can't strip me of my weapon before union representation. I can. And I just did, Vale roared, the veins pulsing in his neck. You are hereby relieved of duty, suspended without pay, pending a full internal affairs investigation. Disarm yourself immediately, or I will have you physically subdued and arrested for insubordination and resisting a lawful order from a commanding officer. Do not test me tonight, Preston. With shaking hands, Hale unclasped his duty belt. He pulled his heavy Glock from its holster, dropping the magazine and clearing the chamber with a hollow clack before placing the weapon on the booking desk. He unclipped his badge and dropped it next to the gun. The metal shield landed with a dull, pathetic thud. Marcus watched the disarming process with clinical detachment. He then turned his attention to the young rookie, Officer Damian Reed, who was plastered against the far wall, looking like he was about to vomit. Officer Reed, Marcus called out softly. Reed jumped, snapping to attention, tears brimming in his eyes. Yes, Your Honor. Sir, I didn't. You stood by, Marcus stated factually. You recognize the discrepancy between the registration and your partner's aggressive narrative. You hesitated when he ordered you to inventory my judicial robe as a costume, but you failed to intervene. The law requires officers to intervene when they witness a fellow officer utilizing excessive force or violating constitutional rights. Reed swallowed hard, a tear finally spilling over his eyelashes. I know, sir. I was scared. He's my training officer, he said. I am not interested in what he said, Marcus replied. I'm interested in what you are going to do now. When Internal Affairs pulls you into a windowless room tomorrow morning, you will be faced with a choice. You can hide behind the blue wall of silence. You can claim you didn't hear what he said, or you can uphold the oath you swore when they pinned that badge to your chest. Your career hinges entirely on the exactness of your memory. I'll tell them everything, Reed blurted out, his voice cracking. I swear to God, Your Honor. I'll write the statement right now. He was out of line. He escalated the situation. You were completely compliant. Hale whipped his head around, glaring at his partner with pure venom. You little rat! You're going to turn on your own partner. He's not your partner anymore, Mr. Hale, Captain Vale interjected coldly. He is a witness to a felony. The precinct photographer arrived, a young, nervous civilian employee hauling a heavy camera bag. Under Vale's strict supervision, the photographer spent 15 minutes documenting Marcus's injuries. The harsh flash of the camera illuminated the deep purple grooves etched into the judge's wrists, the abrasions on his neck where he had been shoved against the vehicle, and the mud splattered across his ruined suit. When the photography was complete, Captain Vale awkwardly cleared his throat. Judge Langford, I have already dispatched a tow truck to release your vehicle from the impound lot. It will be brought directly to the front doors of the precinct. I would be honored to personally drive you home. Marcus calmly rolled down his wet sleeves, wincing slightly as the fabric brushed against his battered wrists. He looked at the captain, his expression unreadable. I appreciate the offer, Captain Vale, but I will respectfully decline, Marcus said. I was brought to this facility in the back of a police cruiser as a criminal suspect. I will not leave in the passenger seat of one as a VIP. I have already contacted a private car service. They are waiting outside. Marcus walked over to the booking counter. He reached out and picked up the damp plastic evidence bag containing his judicial robe. He held it carefully, cradling the symbol of his life's work. He turned back to the room one last time. Officer Hale was slumped in a hard plastic chair, his face buried in his hands, completely broken. The fundamental flaw in your policing, Mr. Hale, Marcus said softly, the silence of the room carrying his voice to every corner, is that you believed the badge granted you superiority over the citizens you were sworn to protect. You forgot that the law applies equally to the man in the handcuffs and the man holding the keys. You will have ample time to reflect on that distinction. Without another word, Honorable Marcus Langford turned and walked out through the heavy double doors, stepping back out into the freezing rain, holding his dignity and his ruined robe tightly against his chest. The fallout was not immediate. It was a slow, meticulously calculated demolition. Marcus Langford did not call a press conference. He did not post angrily on social media. He was a creature of the law, and he utilized the justice system with the devastating precision of a surgeon wielding a scalpel. Soon after the incident, a heavily redacted yet undeniable complaint was filed in federal court. The plaintiff was Marcus T. Langford. The defendants were Preston Hale, the Oak Ridge Police Department, and the city municipality. The lawsuit did not ask for a monetary settlement. In a move that shocked legal analysts across the state, Marcus explicitly waived his right to compensatory damages. He did not want taxpayer money. Instead, the lawsuit demanded sweeping, mandatory, court-ordered consent decrees. He demanded a complete overhaul of the department's use of force policies, mandatory third-party audits of all traffic stops for racial profiling, and the immediate, permanent decertification of Preston Hale. The city attempted to keep the matter quiet, offering closed-door settlements and groveling apologies from the mayor. But the truth, much like water, always finds a crack to slip through. Shortly thereafter, the body camera and dash-cam footage somehow leaked to a prominent investigative journalist. Whether it was a disgruntled clerk in the evidence room or a strategic, anonymous drop, the source remained unknown. But the impact was nuclear. The video went viral within hours. Millions of people watched the unedited raw footage of a distinguished, elderly black man calmly citing constitutional law, being violently shoved against his own luxury car by a sneering, aggressive young cop. The world heard Hale mock the judicial robe, calling it a costume. They heard the violent click of the handcuffs being ratcheted too tight. The public outcry was deafening. Protests erupted outside the 12th precinct. The mayor, facing an unprecedented political crisis, immediately forced the chief of police into early retirement and publicly endorsed every single demand in Langford's federal lawsuit. Internal Affairs concluded their investigation in record time, aided immensely by Officer Damian Reed's sworn, heavily detailed affidavit outlining Hale's pattern of aggressive, racially biased stops. Reed, while reprimanded for failing to intervene sooner, was allowed to keep his job, placed under strict probationary mentorship. Preston Hale was not so lucky. He was formally terminated from the Oak Ridge Police Department, but losing his job was only the first domino to fall. Because of the overwhelming public pressure and the undeniable video evidence of excessive force and civil rights violations, the district attorney, Philip Rhodes, convened a grand jury. Hale was indicted on 3 felony counts: official oppression, aggravated assault, and deprivation of rights under color of law. The arrogant cop, who had bragged about throwing a booster into a concrete cell, was now facing up to 10 years in a federal penitentiary. In the weeks that followed, on a clear morning, the air in Oak Ridge Estates was crisp and bright, a stark contrast to the midnight storm of the arrest. Marcus Langford stepped out of his front door, dressed in a pristine, perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His wrists had healed, leaving only faint, fading yellow bruises. As he walked down his manicured driveway toward his freshly detailed Mercedes-Benz, he noticed a figure standing awkwardly by his mailbox. It was Dr. Leonard Shaw, the retired surgeon neighbor who had driven past Marcus during the arrest, pretending not to see him. Shaw looked pale, holding a small, expensive gift basket. "Marcus," Shaw stammered, stepping forward nervously. I just wanted to come by. I saw the news, the video. I am so incredibly sorry. I drove past that night. I didn't realize. I thought." Marcus stopped, looking at his neighbor with cold, penetrating eyes. "You thought exactly what the officer thought, Leonard," Marcus said, his voice even, stripped of any warmth. "You saw a black man in handcuffs in our neighborhood, and your immediate assumption was not that your neighbor was in distress, but that the police had finally caught the criminal element you fear so much. You didn't stop because it was easier to believe the stereotype than to defend your neighbor." Shaw's face flushed crimson. "Marcus, please, it wasn't like that. I panicked. We are judged not by how we act in the light of day, but by what we do in the dark when we think no one is watching." Marcus replied softly. He walked past Shaw, ignoring the gift basket, and opened the door to his car. "Have a good morning, Leonard." Marcus drove himself to the courthouse, the commute peaceful and uneventful. He parked in his reserved spot and walked through the heavy marble columns of the judicial building. The security guards at the metal detectors stood a little straighter as he passed, murmuring deeply respectful greetings. The entire building knew what he had done. He hadn't just survived an abusive encounter. He had systematically dismantled the abuser and forced systemic change. He walked into his private chambers. Hanging on the heavy wooden valet stand in the corner of the room was his judicial robe. It had been professionally restored, dry cleaned, and pressed until the heavy black pleats were immaculate. Marcus walked over to it. He reached out, his fingertips tracing the thick, solemn fabric. It was not a costume. It was a heavy, burdensome mantle of responsibility. It represented the fragile promise of justice in a world that was too often unjust. He slipped his arms through the wide bell sleeves, pulling the robe over his shoulders. He zipped it up the front, the the sound loud and definitive in the quiet room. He adjusted the collar, smoothing the fabric down his chest. His bailiff knocked lightly on the chamber door, peeking his head in. "All rise, Your Honor." The bailiff smiled warmly. "The courtroom is packed. Are you ready for the morning docket?" Marcus Langford looked at his reflection in the glass of his office window. He saw a man who had been tested by the very system he served. A man who had walked through the fire of prejudice and emerged unbroken. He saw a judge. "I am ready," Marcus said, his voice steady and powerful. He turned and walked through the private door leading to the bench, ready to deliver justice to a world that desperately needed it. The gavel was waiting. Did this story of justice served make your blood boil and cheer at the same time? Power unchecked is a danger to us all. But tonight the law fought back. If you loved this dramatic twist of fate and want more intense, real-life-inspired stories of accountability, karma, and the fight for civil rights, make sure to hit that like button. Share this video with your friends to spread the message that nobody is above the law. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss a thrilling update.